Hello. I made a thing for myself yesterday, like an agreement to make a video about my sexual abuse. One thing I want to say right off the bat, the thing that's held me back from sharing that more on the public platform is simply shame. There's this part of me that feels like people don't want to hear that. That it's ugly, it's heavy, and then I realized that that's mine. It's got so much power there, like for me. Um, and then I look at how I've been able to be helped in my life through the wounds, through the stories that I've been, the traumas that I've been through. And it's because other people chose to share. They chose to hold their power and recognize that. And I mean that like metaphorically, and no means in how I share my story is like, I would never want this to happen to someone else. And saying that, I believe that this was put here, that if I choose to look at it in that way, that how can I complete or how can I direct this story, how can I direct this trauma to show me more about myself, um, that's what then I get to be rewarded with. And that applies to any trauma. And so when it comes to sexual abuse, it's a big thing. Okay, I guess I'll give a couple details in that. Is it happened for about like I think about 4 years when I was a kid, and I say that and I can talk about it more comfortably now because I've shared a lot of it with just people, passerbys, friends, loved ones. Um, it's been a journey. I'd say this is like all the way like 10 years ago when I started consciously, like, acknowledging and working on it. I started to realize, all of this shit that I have to work through to let go of. Um, a lot of those things, there's a book called The Body Keeps the Score. And it talks about how our bodies store trauma, they store memories. And, you know, that's been a part of that for me. My body has points that, if touched or if felt the right, like the wrong way, or just, the right set of circumstances, the right smell, it can be a hug. Like, all of a sudden, I'm washed over with disgust. I get to be washed over with shame, with wrongness. And I'm very appreciative of, meditation, spirituality, because it's helped me recognize that that's okay. Those are feelings. That's my body letting me know uh, this is a part of, what I have to go through to, to understand, to hold my power. In that, I've learned to slow down. I've learned to be a wonderful communicator. Because it's so important to communicate. And there's these fears. Like, so one of the fears for me is to become a perpetrator. And so that fear of letting me exist freely in my sexual energy has been a curse and a blessing, because it's felt like a cage, and then it's been a huge drive in making me into who I am, a lot of who I am. The communication. If I just simply communicate, I can figure out if I'm being respectful, if this is a mutual thing, which, you know, obviously didn't happen when I was a kid. And so, uh, it's a way of not rewriting, not reliving, you know. So, in the many sexual encounters that I've had throughout the years, some of the most beautiful ones were where there was an element of meditation, softness, and quietness being a part of that experience. Damn fly. um, and so those those experiences really helped me acknowledge, because it was all happening under the surface. You know, I could feel it, and it would come out like a volcano at times, or randomly like a stab or something. Um, but the more I slowed down and paid attention and found a partner that was willing to be there with me in that, it helped me recognize more of that wrongness, you know, more of that shame. And, you know, a lot of times I've cried. Crying is a very beautiful emotional tool to take that like wrongness, that shame, and come to recognize it. You know, to see that, you know, I'm not wrong. It's just a little kid in me when I was young took what happened to me and internalized it as if it was my fault, as if I did something wrong, as if I'm the one to carry this burden. And, you know, over the years, I've just had to be very gentle and kind to that younger part of me and say, no, it's not your burden. And I could still feel it at times. And now I feel like a sense of dilation around it. I feel a sense of love. You know, that's been in big part um, just building a strong foundation of love for myself. You know, we get to do that for ourselves. I made a journal that's prompted, you know, with psychology and emotional awareness to develop emotional awareness of myself. And it's such a powerful tool, because when I feel this wrongness, I can go there, I can cry, I can express it. And then as soon as I do that, I can feel free of it, and I can go into a state of joy. I can go from a joy, you know, to a state of weirdness, to a state of awkwardness. And in that, I've learned to experience an emotional fluidity where the emotions aren't as sticky as they once were. And so now, like, I have therapists. I have a wonderful therapist, and you know, even 2 days ago, I had a therapy session, and I got to cry. I say that now because it's like it's such a beautiful, proud thing, you know. And when I get to see myself do that, it just makes me feel like, oh, look at you, you're helping yourself. And when I get to see other people do that, it's the same thing. I'm like, damn, you're taking care of who you are, and it's so powerful. And so, you know, my whole thing is like, there are so many layers to one story. There's so many layers to my trauma, my story of sexual abuse, you know, from where it started to I'm 31 years old. You know, it started, I believe age is hard when I think of when I was a kid, when I was like 5 or 6. And so now I'm 31. You know, that's 25 years. You don't really think about it. I don't think a lot of people think about it too much, but over the last 25 years, it's like I've carried it. And in different ways I've carried it. And you know, and where I am now, I can freely, easily say that I am grateful that in that caring, it's made me so fucking strong. And a recognition of that feels so good because it's like, no more do I let you hold me down. You know, I have that strength to carry you, and I will continue to carry you. And another wonderful tool I've learned is a good shake, a good dance. You know, sorry, I got a hair in my mouth. A good, you know, just movement. Movement is so beautiful. It helps us take that traumatic experience and just, you know, emotionally in the moment, shake it a little bit, allows it to just be somewhere instead of keeping it in, you know. When I was younger, I was such a reserved, like, no, when I was a kid and while it was happening, I was expressing it. I was an angry, annoyed child. I remember my siblings saying, "Oh, your voice is so annoying," and you know, I look back at how I was, you know, acting, and it was I was trying to show the fucking world what was happening in the best possible way, or the way that I understood or knew how. And then after it stopped, you know, and later in life, I went into depression, and then I learned to just keep it in, you know, shut down, to be more reserved. And, you know, there's the, there's like the extremes. It's like we can either go extremely shut down or we can be either like extremely expressive. And, you know, now it's like I find myself, and that's the beauty with words, with communication. It's like there's a middle ground, there's a little balance in it all. It's like I can choose to express one way or the other way. And with words, I can come to understand. You know, and there's this part of me that I feel like now in my life I'm able to step more into that sharing mode, you know, being the story, directing the story. And so it brings this part out of me where I'm like, you know, to anyone that has experienced, you know, maybe a similar sexual trauma, sexual abuse, or any other kind of trauma, but I'm going to pinpoint on sexual abuse. You know, you're not alone. And I say that, and it feels like when I talk about this shit, it's like I'm talking to the little Aaron. You know, you're not alone. It wasn't your fault. It's not your fault. And you have so much power in being able to take that story and direct it to say, this is where I want this to go. You know, with meditation, with slowing down, with listening. There's just so much there. And I'd like to just give a nice big hug. You know, a nice high five. And just to recognize, you know, one thing that I've been able to get in my life is to be seen in that. You know, it's deep down, that's what all of us want. We want to be seen. You know, no matter the pain, no matter the joy, you know, the pleasure or pain, we need to be seen. And what being seen means is it's like it's a form of love. And when we're not, you know, it's like anti-love or wrongness. You know, and so then we hold this weight of wrongness. You know, I want to say this too is if you feel the want to reach out, to talk, to share, I'm here. And within what I'm able to give, I will give because I know what it means. I know how it feels when someone sits there and cares. And then, too, is what I've learned is people's pain is their pain, people's trauma is their trauma. You know, it's not my place to take someone else's trauma, to feel someone else's trauma. I can relate, you know, it can bring up similar experiences for me. And so when people share it, you know, when people share their stuff now, I get to see that and I get to feel proud for them sharing. I don't feel weighted, I don't feel heavy. And I've come to learn it's a reflection of my internal state. It's a reflection of what I've been able to do with the weight for myself. And so when I see other people, no longer does it remind me of my own weight that I have not learned how to fully carry, how to show me of who I am. And so it's like I get to experience a freedom in that. Going back to the sexual abuse, so I've done research into it in the past. And one thing I learned is so 25%, and this is from I haven't read a lot, I've read some. 25%, from what I understand, of sexual abuse victims side with the perpetrator. I was one of those 25%. I defended the perpetrator. And for me, reading that helped me because I looked at my other brothers, the people that it happened to as well, and it was the opposite for them. And that confused me for a very long time. I didn't understand. And then I looked back and I come to recognize, you know, okay, like what caused me? Like a part of me to heal is to come to understand what happened, you know? That's a part of my passion. I like psychology. I like understanding. And you know, there's the feeling side and then there's the thinking side. And you know, I want to experience both. I want to come to an understanding through feeling and then through thinking, through thought. And for me, my understanding of why I chose to side with the perpetrator, and I say I chose why it happened, um, is because I idolized the perpetrator. You know, I looked up to them. That's my best understanding of why that happened. You know, when we're kids, you know, when that happens at such a young age, you know, for me, when it happened to me when I wasn't even 10, we're looking for role models. You know, we're looking for people to learn from. And this person was that. I've thought a lot about sharing who this person was. You know, being honest in that. And for me, I guess I'm mindful of that because I know when I share my story, it'll incite emotions in others. And all I have at the end of the day is fucking love. And I don't want to give that power to the perpetrator. They did what they did. Now let them fucking go. You know? That's them. It's not me. And so I choose to hold that personally, you know. Maybe with friends I might share it, but when it comes to a bigger platform, it feels more right now for me to just hold that for myself. You know, some other things that happened with that when I was younger was, you know, it was like a modeling. And so it was like there's always this part of me that knew something wrong was happening. Okay, I'm gonna popcorn a little bit here. uh, I'm gonna go to the moment that it came out. Um, I remember being in the kitchen, and I don't know if I was feeling any. I do remember being secretive because I remember whispering it into my sister's ear a little bit of what was happening. But I didn't. I remember being secretive. I don't remember feeling like anything wrong was happening. It was like I was telling someone else a secret. And I look at that and I'm extremely appreciative because it's like, was there a deeper part of me that was, guiding me, that pushed me to say that? A part of me wants to say yes. At the end of the day, I don't know. I just am grateful because after I did that, my sister reacted. I saw the reaction on her face, and then she went and told my parents. And then after that, it stopped. In this, okay, another layer of this is when it did come up and my parents learned of this, and I'm going to speak for me. It happened to some of my other brothers as well. But I'm going to speak from my experience. That when it did come up and it came out, it stopped. I say that in the shortness because that's how fucking short it seems in my memory. And I've talked about this with my mom. I wish I could have talked about it with my dad, but he passed away. In that, no one ever came and checked in with me. And I say that in the recognition that I've had to check in with myself now. Because that's what I needed. When someone goes through this kind of experience, what they need is they need for someone to come there and say, hey, how is it going? How are you feeling? And if they don't want to share just yet, just sit there patiently and wait. Children don't fully understand always what love is. And a lot of times, love just means sitting there, being there, wanting to be there, understanding that it can be hurtful, that it can be painful to sit there and be there in that. And for a long time, I held that against my mom and dad. That was, it's a part of that fear of abandonment for me. That was a big part of that. And after that, feeling like I wasn't seen, I wasn't loved, it just fucking put another spiral of like internal wrongness. Now it was like, oh, okay. It added to that layer of like, I am wrong. And it like, I think there was a layer in that where I started feeling selfish if I talked about my wounds, if I talked about my pain. That was selfish of me. That I was doing something wrong. And I know I'm not now. But for such a long time, I carried that. And there are moments to this day where when I share creatively, um, when I share myself, when I share my authenticity, there's an element where I feel selfish in that. I feel like I'm taking up space, that these people, that I am being a burden in some way. And I see where it comes from. It comes from that little kid, little Aaron, going through all of this hurt. And then no one not understanding how to come there and hold him and let him process through all of that fucking pain. And so he just held it. It just stuck there. His body, his beautiful being held that because we need to eventually process through it. It's a part of our journey. I laugh. Laughter, I'll say, is another wonderful tool. It can, I think to every tool there's a beautiful, and then there's it's a double-sided sword. There's a good side and there's a bad side. It can be very used very wisely, and it can be abused. And for a long time, laughter was that for me. It was a way to cover. It was a way to hide. And when you look at the science of laughter, the message that it sends emotionally is all is okay. That's why it's a beautiful tool. Because when I'm feeling a sense of wrong, when I'm feeling a sense of shame, instead of me using laughter to cover it up, I can use it as a way to experience more fluidity, to change that perspective, to direct that story. And so a lot of times now it's just a natural response, it's an authentic response. And so, back to that time when it did come up and, it was just pushed under the rug, forgive and forget. I talked about it with, now I've been writing a book, and that term came up, forgive and forget. I love forgiveness. I got nothing against forgiveness. Forgetness? Yeah, I got a lot to say. You don't want to catch me with forget. Because we don't forget. Consciously, I might forget. That's a beautiful thing of the mind. Another little fun fact when it comes to sexual abuse or extreme traumas, our mind has this wonderful way of forgetting, putting it out of our conscious view, so then we can live because we're not ready to heal from it. We don't have the support to heal from it. And when we start receiving that support, or when we get older and we become safe, or when I say safe, when we get to an age where we can then work on it, it starts coming back up. And so at a very young age, it just gets blocked out, just blanks out. Okay, and so now back to forget. We don't forget. And I say we in the sense that accumulating the subconscious and the conscious and the unconscious. The little I in me might forget, but the big I, that intuitive, that whole self doesn't. The body keeps a score. And so they remind, they guide. And so after that moment, the discussion literally lasted for, I don't know, maybe a couple hours. I don't even know if it was that long. Again, memory is a little fogged when I think back that far. But it happened. And because that was the moment it stopped. And then all the way up until high school, it then resurfaced. And then, the law got involved, detective got involved, police got involved. And, you'd think that that's a good thing. What I mean by that, you think that at a personal level for me, that it would have been a healing thing. And so I'm not going to say that it's a bad thing, because I think, the law, justice, that is beautiful. In many ways, it's very helpful. When it came to my emotional journey, to my healing of that wound, there was a helping of it, and then there was another layer of trauma that happened for me in that. And I've been able to talk to my sisters about this, and some of my family members about this, because that was that layer in there, is it coming back up. And I remember a part of me was like, well, why? I thought, like, in my mind, I was like, I thought I already moved past this. Like, it was something of the past. Not knowing that my emotional self and my body were just holding on to it. We're just waiting for me, my consciousness, or my conscious self to meet them, to feel ready to start working on that. And so I remember that, and then I remember I had this avoidance of wanting to share anything with a detective. I think that I don't fully understand why there was that element. I think there was a sense of like secrecy or shame, obviously, that was in there. I didn't feel comfortable too with the detective. I didn't feel safe. I didn't feel safe in who I was. It's like all of these people that I was raised around, when it came to modeling healthy safety, that just wasn't modeled. And I say that with love, you know? Before, like I said, I used to really hold on to that. And now I realize that a lot of people don't understand what safety is, the models of that. My family being some of those people. And what I've learned, I can show them. It's not my choice whether I feel safe or not. When I say that, is like, it's whether I listen or not. And so there is choice. I'm not going to say it's not my choice. What I mean is like, it's not like I can't tell myself that I'm going to feel safe. I can do what I need to do to make myself feel safe. And so some of those things are like telling myself that vulnerability is a strength. Emotional vulnerability is a strength. It takes courage. And so over the years of telling myself that, thank you, Brene Brown, that created a beautiful foundation block for my emotional foundation. And so then I started feeling strong when I started sharing the vulnerability. I stopped feeling the wrongness. I stopped feeling the shame around being vulnerable. It can still feel like raw, but it's been completely transformative for me. It just used to feel like that. And so going back to that feeling of safe, in that when the detective and the law got involved, um, yeah, I didn't share anything. I don't remember sharing. If I did share some, I didn't share much with the detective. I remember sharing it with my sisters. And, I've shared that with my sisters where when I shared it with them, again, they didn't know how to hold space. I understand their intention was beautiful. They wanted to know, they wanted to help. But the ways that they were taught to hold space wasn't the safest possible way. And so for me, sharing all of that, and then I had this element of this religion that I was raised in, with homophobia being a big part of that religion. And so there was this other fear that I didn't want to be perceived as being gay. I remember that. I remember sharing in the room with them around all of that. And then I remember saying, I don't want other people to see this because I don't want other people to think I'm gay. And yeah, I this homophobia is, I'll just say simply, that's not who I am. I, it's not my place to judge other people. And the fucking Bible says that. It's like, it's God's place to judge. If you choose to believe in God, I say that. It's like, I don't believe in the Christian God. Let's say this, I believe in the all. The Christian God being a part of that. And so there was that element when I was sharing that there was this fear, the shame of being perceived a certain way. And once again, I didn't feel like people actually cared about how I felt. They just wanted to know what happened. And with that, it's like I understand the wanting to know what happened, especially when it comes to the law. when it comes to, you know, carrying out justice. But for the child, for the kid, for the person that goes through that, the sensitive side, what's the most important is how we feel. You know, and that's what I needed. All those years, there was this part of me that was saying, don't leave me alone. I don't want to be alone. I don't know how to be alone. And it's fucking scary. It's heavy. And what I tell that little kid, that sensitive part, is you're not alone. That's how you feel, and it's okay that you feel that. It's more than okay, it's beautiful. Look at you, you're feeling your emotions. You're feeling your pain. And that stuff is just in the way. Like, it's a part of your journey. And the more you feel through it, guess what? You're going to feel more free. You're going to get to be more me. You're going to be able to live more authentically. Your emotions are going to fall into the rightful places that they're meant to. They're going to help you because they're teachers, they're guides. And all of this pain, all of this trauma confuses them. And so when I've experienced them, they've been confusing. And lastly, I would just, no, more than lastly, it's continuous. I would just go give him a hug. That's one thing that I noticed for myself is like, when it comes to physical touch, there's this part of me that sometimes wants to get a hug and sometimes doesn't. And that's a layer of that for me is there was a lot of physical affection in my childhood, and there was the opposite, obviously, with what I'm sharing here. And so for me, what I've learned is a communication of respect. And so when I'm around someone that's crying, I just sit there and then I tell them, thank you for crying. Thank you for taking care of yourself. And then if I feel the want to give them a hug, I ask, say, can I give you a hug? That's it. And if they say no, that's okay. I say, thank you for saying no. You're taking care of yourself again. I know how hard it can be to have boundaries, to put those boundaries up and stand strong behind them. Because I didn't know what boundaries were from a very young age, or I did, but then I was manipulated, I was abused, and so those boundaries became this very blur. And that blur took such a long time for me to say no, and to feel strong in saying no, to not waver, because for so long when I would say no, a part of me felt insecure. I felt like I felt wrong in saying no. I felt selfish in saying no. I felt it was like my obligation to give them what they wanted, to disrespect myself and just give. And I don't want to do that anymore. And I don't do it anymore. And that little kid in me feels so proud, feels so strong, and feels protected, feels safe, feels heard, feels seen. You know, in this, it's like the result of all of this is like I get to wake up like yesterday. I woke up and I felt like the fucking all. I felt like the universe was just giving me a hug. And boy, did that feel good. And I get to feel that more and more in my life. This abundance of love. And so when you choose to work on these things, when you choose to go and lean into your pain, that's what's on the other side. You get to feel how fucking special you are. You know, we're all so special. And I want everyone to feel that, to feel how special they are. You know, even my perpetrator, to recognize, to go through that accountability, to fucking take, to be in that pain. But it's like immediately when I say that, there's this part of me that feels a little weird in that. And so I'll let that be. I'm going to let that go. That it's not my place. Maybe there are some people that just need to go through certain things. And so I'll reiterate that. That I don't know if I could see that. And that's okay. That's an element of the church that I was raised in, was this like, this idea of Jesus wanting well for everybody, wanting love. And I want love for everyone, because a part of that love is accountability, to take what wrong has been done and to own it. And so I'll say, being a victim, I just, yeah, I guess like right now, I'm just paying attention to that feeling of weirdness when I said, I want my perpetrator to feel special too. And the feeling said no. And so I'm going to take that back. I want people to heal. I want people to be accountable, to be responsible. And I can say that for my perpetrator. I want them to be accountable. I want them to be responsible. I want them to heal. I think for me, sometimes in that, it's like there's that element where it's like when I'm feeling so good, that it's not okay. Or, that level of trust that I now feel for myself. I was talking about it with a friend yesterday. I had in my therapy session of like, that's not okay. And it's because so what's been happening is like, I've been learning to trust myself so much more, in sexuality, in feeling my sexual energy, in expressing my sexual energy. And when I share that sometimes, even with my therapist, and I'm talking about that stuff and I'm crying, and when I'm not crying, just talking about it, there's this element, and it's what I mentioned before. It's like there's this part of me that feels like a sense of wrongness. And okay, what my mind drifted a little bit. I had a little blank space. So to get more on the topic, so in my therapy session, what was happening was like I was sharing about trusting myself more and more, and then my therapist questioned something, and it felt like to me, because maybe my mind read his facial expression or how he came off with the question, that he doesn't trust me, or I can't trust myself this much. I can't hold myself this strongly. I can't love myself this much. And it was just one of those little moments of like, oh, that story, once again, coming back up, that pain, it's trying to protect me. And I'm just there to help it and say, actually, I can. You know, I've built a beautiful amount of awareness for who I am, and I can trust it fully. And when I make it wrong, and when I do wrong, I will take accountability. I will right that wrong. I will be responsible. And so when I experience doubt, when I look at something and I feel wrong, but when I look at it and I didn't actually do any wrong, I can learn to let go of that wrongness. And then I can learn to go and say, hey, did I do anything that, from when I feel safe, I can communicate that, because I don't always know who I am. And what I mean by that is like, when I am in the world, I've come to recognize that all of this stuff I've been through comes out subconsciously, unconsciously. It just comes out. And so I don't know if I've been mean always, and that's something I've learned to empathize with other people. It's like when people are like really mean or doing wrong, a lot of times they're not consciously aware of it. It doesn't mean they're not responsible for what that was happened. It doesn't mean that I'm not responsible if I didn't see that I wasn't aware of that. But for me, it's like I can go there and check in. And I choose to do that not from a place where I'm feeling wrong. So like 2 weeks ago, I was out dancing and I met this girl, and we were dancing together, having so much fun. I was feeling playful. I was feeling sexual. Like I was feeling all these things. And when I say feeling sexual, I'm like learning to feel more of that, feel okay with feeling like a sexual being. And we were doing like no contact dance, beautiful way of like, enjoying closeness with people. And then there was this moment where I had done a move that felt sexual for me, and then immediately fucking here came the weight and the wrongness, and immediately my state of playfulness and wonder and fun just went to it went to like feeling, oh shit, I did something wrong. And what was happening was like I kind of slowed down a little bit. I still was dancing a little bit. I looked at her. My mind wanted to think that, oh, like I had crossed a boundary. I did something wrong. And, you know, after that, I kind of took my own space. I walked around. I started taking care of myself. I went and found some strangers that were in the club too, or in this warehouse. Sat down with them, talked to them a little bit. Then I shared, hey, I'm feeling a little wrong. Or I asked them, can I share something? And then I shared what I was feeling, and that wanting to go and apologize to her, yet knowing that I didn't do anything wrong. And, then those people are like, oh no, you didn't do anything wrong. And I was appreciative of that. But all of that, like I still felt the weight. I still felt this wrongness. It was all present, you know? And it didn't feel as heavy as it's felt in the past. Because in the past, it felt like fucking daggers. Where this time it felt heavy. I could operate and I could understand, okay, I didn't do anything wrong. And so eventually I continued my night. There was a moment where I wanted to go and talk to her. And so I went and danced by her again, but I didn't talk. I was there for like a minute and then I danced off. Um, and, I went to bed. The feeling was there. That heaviness was there. Then the following morning I woke up. It was still there. And so I utilized the tools I've learned. I called some friends that were vulnerable and emotional for me, like emotionally available and vulnerable. And I talked through it with a couple friends. And then I felt the need to do a meditation. And so I did a meditation. And then I started chanting in my meditation. I started singing. And it just like started working with that shit. And 10 minutes, 15 minutes later, I felt fucking light. I had been able to let it go. I've been able to process it, put that energy and let it go. And it felt good. And all of that, there was that part of me that wanted to communicate to her because I had gotten her contact. We'd exchanged contact info, and I wanted to share that with her because I've learned it's exposure therapy. It really has helped me past these moments. And what I've learned now is to make sense of it all, then to share it, especially if it's a stranger, because I don't know where they are. They don't know where I am. And so, having these emotionally vulnerable, available friends, this support network, I can go to them, help myself process through it, make sense of it rationally, and then communicate. And so after I felt more safe and grounded in myself, when I felt light, I then reached out to her and, I, expressed that I really enjoyed the energy, that, being playful and whatnot. And then I asked her, like, hey, can I share this with you? I had this moment of trigger/activation when we were dancing last night. If you'd be open to it, I'd like to share. And she did. She was open and receptive to it. And then so I got to share all of that. And, I got to share how it felt, that process through it, the meditation, letting her know that I'm feeling okay. I'm not coming here for her validation, or for what I mean is I'm not coming here for her to tell me whether I was right or wrong. I know that I didn't do anything wrong. In that, I then, at the end of it, I did check in. And I said, hey, I just want to check in. In any way did I cross your boundary? And that's a part of me recognizing that, hey, as much as I might see that I didn't do any wrong, doesn't mean that wrong didn't happen. And so I was extending that to her. I was like 95% certain, and I'm okay with that little 5% existing. And I'm going to listen to that, and I'm going to express that. And, she responded wonderfully. She was like, thank you for respecting my boundaries. And no, I didn't cross any of them. And it just felt good. Like going through that was just a beautiful experience of being able to process through all of that. I was like, yeah, when I get to do those things, every time I do that, I feel more free. So next time when I'm dancing and I move my body in that way and I feel more of my sexual energy, that's not going to happen. Or if it does, it's not going to be so heavy. It's not going to be so sticky. Hey, um, it's not going to be so sticky anymore. And so, I've learned to trust that process. I've learned to trust going through that, to feeling more free, to feeling understanding through emotions. There are many times I think back to when I was experiencing sexual confusion. I remember that I felt so scared to just say, I'm feeling confused, and let that fucking be, and not need to make sense of it. Because I had attached so much in myself that I needed to make sense of these things. That's who I was. I was one that made sense, that I could think through these things. Because I was always a really good thinker. I was smart, very academically inclined. And so that was a big part of my identity. And then when I finally let go and I started changing my identity into my fucking whole versus just these individual parts, it opened that space. And I was like, I'm confused. And then I just let that be. And it felt freeing. It felt nice to just be like, oh, I'm feeling confused. And then, the progression from that is like, all of a sudden, I started to realize and understand that I just needed to feel confused. And then after feeling confused, it's like I didn't feel confused anymore. I started seeing and understanding how all of this came together. And so when I say understand, and I mentioned this before, is there's a thinking understanding, to think through something, to understand it intellectually. And then there's a feeling understanding. You have to feel through it. I have to feel through those emotions to understand. And if I don't, I haven't yet experienced that understanding of feeling. And, there might be more different ways of understanding, maybe spiritual or whatever. But those two, I've definitely put a lot of effort in and come to an experience and understand. I say understand. I recognize what they are and how they play out and how to go through them. One thing that comes up for me is the many times when I would feel shame and I'd feel wrongness and I'd feel the want to cry, the wall would come up and I wouldn't. I would feel myself pull back. And that was the mind protecting me, or protecting pain, protecting me from feeling pain. Because we don't talk about that. We talk about it, but we don't talk about the emotional processing of how beautiful pain is and how strong it helps us become. And so that's a big part of what I want to share, is a recognition of that. It's like when I have learned to feel through my pain, even this video, the last 58 minutes, like I feel good. I feel free. I feel strong. And that's authentic. And I feel loved. And I feel centered, I feel whole. And it's funny because it's like, I never thought that before. I never thought that I could feel shame, and then moments later, I could feel whole. Yeah, when it comes to like, just going through all of this, the best thing I could say, or some of the best thing, some things I like to say. Trust. So in the stories that come up that don't feel so good, there's an opportunity to trust. There's an opportunity to love. There's an opportunity to get to know yourself more. To get to know yourself more through your wounds, through your pain. Through your pain, you recognize your strength, your power. Another thing is slowing down helps you hear those stories. Or it's helped me make sense of what is in the story. When people say quiet the mind, for me it's learning that to be an observer, to listen, to understand that I used to attach a lot to when I would think that was me, that the thoughts were me. And it's like, no, the thoughts are a part of me. I don't choose my thoughts always. There's different types of thoughts. Like when you wake up in the morning, first thought that pops in your head, did you say, this is the thought that's going to pop into my head? Probably not. And if you did, must have some extreme level of like consciousness or awareness. I've yet to do that for myself or meet someone. I'd say this is, I've learned through going through this processing, through this healing, through this journey, that's how I get to control or direct how I feel. So me waking up yesterday morning like the all was giving me a hug, like the universe, like the world was giving me a hug. That's a result. That's an effect. The cause was doing all of this work. Meditating, paying attention, crying, feeling, learning how to be my whole self. That's the result. It makes me think of all the way back to when I started meditating, and when it comes to the sexual abuse, one of the things like the first rewards that I experienced was in my thinking mind, I had all of these thoughts of intrusive thoughts, and I don't see thoughts as intrusive anymore. That's more of the emotional attachment to that thought that makes it feel intrusive. When I learned to detach emotionally from a thought, it was just like, oh, that's the thought in its neutral state. The feeling is separate, and that thoughts can generate feelings or create feelings. And so I remember that all of a sudden I used to have a lot of intrusive thoughts, or thoughts that felt intrusive. And then meditation taught me to step back, and I stopped feeling this intrusiveness of thought. And so then the thought was there, and it was like, oh, hello, thought. And it would come, and then it would go. And it wouldn't sit around for so long like it used to. And I realized, oh, okay, that's the emotional aspect that causes it to sit around. And, over the years, those quote unquote intrusive thoughts have just become thoughts. And then, through guidance and, this work, my mind has become more clear. And so my thoughts go into the directions that I really enjoy. They go in creative directions. They wander in love. It's like I'll be living nowadays and my mind will just wander into ideas of love. And it's just beautiful. I'm going to have to come to an end here. It seems like my storage says keeps storage low. And so I'm going to just say thank you. Thank you and thank you.